66.
6640.
Your future lies in 6640.
66 books by 40 authors, and yet we now discover it's an integrated message system from outside our time domain.
Welcome to 6640, the ministry outreach of Koinonia House and Koinonia Institute. Today's Bible teacher is Chuck Missler, connecting the Bible to your life and the world around you. In today's study, Chuck continues his teaching on the book of Joel, chapter 3.
Now, one of the questions that some scholars figure that all this talk about Philistia and Phoenicia may prefigure Israel's enemies collectively. And they see that happens in Moab in Isaiah 25, and also the whole story is about Edom in the book of Obadiah. That may be a very defendable academic view. I personally don't think so. I personally think that God means what he says, and they're being used denotatively, not connotatively here. But that's just one person's opinion. Anyway, at that time, God's people will gain ascendancy over their foes, and that's the key part of this whole passage anyway. Isaiah 41, and you can look up the passages, especially the passages in Obadiah, Micah 7, and so on. Phoenicia, remember, is equivalent to Lebanon, and maybe even referring to Syria. Philistia, of course, is a term for the Philistines that came from Greece. They tried to invade Egypt, couldn't make it, so they settled on the west coast there of Israel, and it's the Gaza Strip today, of course. Joel chapter 3, verses 4 to 8 is viewed by some as a peak episode that is emphasized by what they call rhetorical underlining or heightened vividness. There's a stylistic emphasis that scholars will point to there. It concentrates on specific participants in a courtroom-like atmosphere. In other words, God is talking to them, not about them. And that's one reason I think he's being specific. I don't tend to regard those labels connotatively. Some scholars do, and they may turn out to be right. The term vengeance is all through here, and that's a negative notion in Western thought. But it's a major theme that runs throughout Scripture. Psalm 137, and it's the controlling idea in Obadiah and Nahum. In the New Testament, we see it in Revelation 6, 9 to 10. The justice of God demands that injustice of men and nations toward each other be redressed. However, while vengeance is a theme, vengeance belongs to God. We're not to take it in our own hands. That's not only Deuteronomy 32, it's Romans 12, and so on. Remember all through this that the apple of his eye is an identified group. It's called Israel. So Joel continues, proclaim ye this among the Gentiles, prepare war, wake up the mighty men, let all the men of war draw near, let them come up. Prepare war. That means, the term actually means sanctify a war. Declare a holy war. Wow. It's a dare. It's a call to arms. And we find the same kind of expressions in Obadiah 1 and Haggai 2. The same proclamation is in Revelation 16. The Antichrist is going to be responsible for gathering these armies together in the valley of Jezreel. Now, we know where that is. That's what Megiddo overlooks. And calling for a war against the Jews. And that's what we typically call the Armageddon campaign. The Antichrist will be the one precipitating all that. And, of course, it will be unsuccessful. So this all parallels the summoning of the people of Judah to the temple. Same kind of language is being used. The destruction of the locusts in chapter 1 led to a general call to come for fasting and prayer. And when heeded, the Lord relented and healed the land. There's a parallel here. The Judeans came together for repentance and are delivered. The nations now come for war with God, and they are destroyed. And it's a war to the finish. This, Armageddon, is a war to the finish. And it's all echoed, by the way, in Psalm 2. Where it's anticipated. Why do the heathen rage and imagine a vain thing? They take up arms against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us cast their cords from among us. And that Psalm 2 is a foundational piece here. Okay, let's continue here, Joel 3. Beat your plowshares into swords and your pruning hooks into spears, and let the weak say, I am strong. That's in the exact opposite as it's usually quoted in Isaiah 2 verse 4 and Micah 4:3, where they're to turn your swords into plowshares and your spears into pruning hooks. In other words, take your warfare weapons and convert them to useful things for peacetime. That's the joyous quote of all of that. No, this is the inverse of that. Beat your plowshares into swords and your pruning hooks into spears. See? Hosea is talking, in Hosea 2, he's talking about what happens after God's kingdom set up. That's when they convert their swords to plowshares and so forth. Joel is talking about what they do prior to God's setting up his kingdom. He says, and let the weak say, I am strong. It's not a necessity, it's just enthusiasm that is being embraced here in the passage. Let the weak say, I am strong. It's a dare. It's a dare. Assemble yourselves and come, all ye heathen. Gather yourselves together round about. Thither cause thy mighty ones to come down, O Lord. Thy mighty ones. That's a term for warriors. Apparently refers to the angelic hosts who will assist God in this judgment. Compare that with Psalm 103, verse 20, Zechariah 14:5, and other passages. These are the same warriors we saw in verse 9. They're also, again, I call your attention to Psalm 2, first few verses. My bet is on his. Where's your bet? Let the heathen be awakened and come up to the valley of Jehoshaphat. For there will I sit to judge all the heathen round about. There's that term, the valley of Jehoshaphat. Some people equate it with Megiddo. For there I will sit down to judge all nations. I don't see it that way. I think that valley of Jezreel is where they assemble. They're going against Jerusalem. But in any case, there are scholars that equate that with Megiddo. Because Megiddo is a real place. It sits on a tell or a hill, about 70 feet high now as a result of being the site of 20 different cities over a 3,000-year period. And it's on the southwest end of the Carmel mountain range. It borders on the Jezreel Valley, and you look across that valley and you see Nazareth on the other side. Or turning around, when Jesus was a boy in Nazareth, he could look out on that valley and see Megiddo on the other side. 22 miles wide at that point. And it's the crossroads of the Middle East, north and south. Two trade routes meet there at the King's Highway and Via Maris. The Egyptians, the Persians, the Crusaders, the Druzes, the Turks, and Arabs have fought there. Deborah and Barak defeated the Canaanites there in Judges 4 or 5. Gideon defeated the Midianites there in Judges 7. Ahaziah slew Jehu there in 2 Kings 9. Josiah was killed by Pharaoh Necho of Egypt there in 2 Kings. Also, there's passages that relate to Edom and Judah, holding court. And the harvest there is also alluded to in Revelation 14. Put ye in the sickle, for the harvest is ripe. Come get you down, for the press is full. The fats overflow, for their wickedness is great. These agricultural idioms really for a form of judgment. But these idioms change from war to harvest here. We see a harvest flavor to these idioms. That occurs all through the prophetic passages. The commands are in the plural, implying they're given to the warriors that we heard alluded to in verse 11. The agricultural imagery is unmistakable. The locusts and the drought prevented any harvesting. Renewed harvest of plain now after repentance. For the nations, harvest time means that they are ripe for judgment. Wickedness is great. The sin of the Amorites is full, if you remember the Genesis 15-16 passage. The word of sickle occurs all through the book of Revelation, 14, 19, and so on. Ripe. Blood will splash to the horses' bridles. That's apparently like 5 feet high. For over 200 miles. 176 miles precisely is the distance from Megiddo to Basra. You go through these passages. In Zechariah 14:12, there's a passage that some people feel describes a neutron bomb, and it seems to, and yet it might be something just byproduct of what's going on here. Reaping versus treading. I want to talk a little bit about this. Throughout the Scriptures, reaping is a symbol or a metaphor for salvation. Thus, the reaping results in the salvation of the sheep Gentiles. And that's also found in Revelation 14. The treading results in the destruction of the anti-Semites. This treading, taking place just outside the walls of Jerusalem, is also described in Revelation 14 in the later passage. The reaping is described in verses 14 to 16 in Revelation 14. The treading is described in verses 17 to 20. There's an issue of denotation here that may be very different than is commonly thought of. This judgment of the Gentiles is described in Joel, of course, is the very same judgment that is described in Matthew 25, the judgment of the sheep and the goats. Let's continue, verse 14. Multitudes, multitudes in the valley of decision, for the day of the Lord is near in the valley of decision. Now here's another term that occurs here. Multitudes, hama, it means making a loud noise or tumult, like crowds on crowds is perhaps a good translation. And this might be a scenario of Daniel 11. It might be something else. It's drawn by demonic spirits. That's what Revelation 16 would suggest. In any case, what we're seeing here may be Satan's final shot. But this valley of decision thing is widely misunderstood. It's often, that phrase is used in terms of the believer making a decision. It's the Lord's time to decide, not theirs. He's decided to, enough's enough, in other words. Haras's decision, it means sharpen or cut. Render a judgment is really what is implied here. And the word thrashing, winnowing, and separation are equivalent terms used in Isaiah 41 and elsewhere. And even in Ruth 3, we have the thrashing floor seen there, idiomatic of the tribulation period. A lot of wordplay going on in here. The noun can also mean that which is dug out or excavated like a moat in Daniel 9:25. And thus a deep valley, fulfillment of Genesis 12, first 3 verses perhaps. The sun and the moon shall be darkened, and the stars shall withdraw their shining. Very frequently used idiom here. These cosmic signs that accompany the locust back in chapter 1 are now on a more universal scale. We find the same expression used in Matthew 24 by the Lord himself in verse 29 there, Mark 13, verses 24 and 25. And it's the same kind of thing we hear about in Revelation 6, verses 12 through 13. This judgment is to be distinguished from that is held before the white throne, which is at the end of 1,000 years. Don't get those confused. And many people do, don't. Verse 16, the Lord also shall roar out of Zion and utter his voice from Jerusalem, and the heavens and the earth shall shake. But the Lord will be the hope of his people and the strength of the children of Israel. The Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Lord will roar out of Zion. And we get this, the Lion of the tribe of Judah idiom used in Revelation chapter 5, verse 5. Earthquake follows, it shakes the entire earth and its foundations and even sets the heavens tottering, apparently. So shall ye know that I am the Lord your God, dwelling in Zion, my holy mountain. Then shall Jerusalem be holy, and there shall no strangers pass through her any more. This is an echo of Zechariah 12:10. They shall look upon me whom they pierced, and they shall mourn for him as one mourneth for his son. For thousands of years, the Jews have heard the tramping of foreign boots through their holy city. Babylonians, Greeks, Romans, Arabs, Crusaders, the UN, what have you. So this is a very welcome sound. No more foreigners. Now let's talk the difference between foreigners and strangers. Zar has a stronger meaning than stranger. For ger are always welcome because Israelites were strangers in Egypt. Ger is a friendly stranger. Zar is a foreigner. It's a stronger meaning than stranger. A stranger could participate in the blessings of the Sabbath and so forth, in contrast to foreigners who sought to wrest the land from God's people and enjoy its benefits for themselves. So the foreigners is an adversarial term. It's even possible for Israelites themselves to become aliens, zarim, within their own nation by following after pagan cults. Then they become foreigners in the negative sense. God hates wickedness in all its forms. They call it the holy city, but not until God dwells in the midst. Zechariah 14 makes that emphasis. The Messianic kingdom, Joel, now in chapter 3, 18 to 21, we're dealing with the kingdom. The land will be well watered. We get that in verse 18. There'll be a special millennial river. We get that also in the last part of number 18. And when you read Ezekiel, the last 9 chapters of Ezekiel, especially this comes up in Ezekiel chapter 47, 12 verses about there's going to be a river that comes out of the temple, flows to Jerusalem, splits in two directions, and it's all described there. It's surprisingly detailed. There'll be a desolation of Egypt and Edom, which, of course, is southern Jordan, but maybe much more than that. I'll come to that in a minute. The desolation of Egypt is limited to only 40 years, by the way. The first 40 years of the Messianic kingdom, but Edom will be desolate throughout the 1,000 years of the Millennium kingdom. And that's in Ezekiel 29. I want to talk a little more about that. It's interesting. Egypt symbolizes the world, and it is desolate for 40 years, but then it has some good things coming. Edom is a very special situation that I want to talk more about. But in any case, verse 20 of this passage, Israel will live in security. Israel will experience a national salvation, verse 21. That's the climax of the chapter. But let's take a look at verse 18. It shall come to pass in that day that the mountains shall drop down new wine, and the hills shall flow with milk, and all the rivers of Judah shall flow with waters, and a fountain shall come forth of the house of the Lord, and shall water the valley of Shittim. The valley of Shittim is on the east side of the Jordan River. Wow. See, that river is going to flow in both directions. It's going to flow to the east and the west. Now, these blessings will exceed the splendor of David and Solomon. In terms of borders, you can find those borders in Genesis 15, verse 38. When you speak of the West Bank, you can ask the person, which river did you have in mind? Because it's not the Jordan that's the boundary, it's the Euphrates. Big deal. There's a 34 square mile section set aside for the priests, the Levites, the temple. That's all diagrammed for you in our commentary on Ezekiel 48. And so you want to dig into that. The Mount of Olives, Zechariah tells us, will be split like the Arabah, like a big fault through there. The rift from the Sea of Galilee to the Dead Sea. Wow, is the rift of Arabah. This is going to be the site of the fourth temple, the millennial temple, the one that we believe is described in the last 9 chapters of Ezekiel. That's where his throne will be. It's not just we use the term temple, but it's also going to be a palace. And the floor plan is laid out in detail. It's worth your study. The Shekinah departed from the temple back in Ezekiel 10 and so on. It will now descend through the east gate, according to Ezekiel 43. People ask, why are there sacrifices? All these sacrifices are talked about. For the same reason we had sacrifices in the Old Testament. They were nothing. None of those sacrifices paid for their sins. It was just a memorial in anticipation of the payment that was made at the cross. And so they were memorials in advance in the Old Testament, and they'll be memorials after the fact in the New Testament. And this is all described in the Epistle of the Hebrews, chapter 9, especially verse 12. See, none of the Old Testament were efficacious. They were representative. They were prophetic, is the point. And so you want to read the Epistle of Hebrews, chapters 9 and 10, which goes into all of that. And so these, in the future, are also assumed to be memorial or instructive. Now, the covenant with Israel includes promises regarding the land, Jacob's blessings for Judah, and so forth. That's all in Genesis 49, among other places. The water from the house in Jerusalem is in Ezekiel 47, as I've mentioned. It's also alluded to in Zechariah 14:8. The Feast of Tabernacles will be worshipped globally. Zechariah will discover that all the nations will observe the Feast of Tabernacles. We'll also discover that that Luke even makes, in the Gospel of Luke, we have mention of the church leadership over the Gentile cities. We know the 12 apostles will rule over the 12 tribes. That's in both Matthew 19 and Luke 22. And the word shittim is a Hebrew term for acacia trees, and the same term for the burning bush, the tabernacle, and so forth. So the valley of Shittim may be just an allusion to these goings on. It's on the border between Moab and Israel beyond the Jordan. It's the last place that Israel camped east of the Jordan before entering the land of Canaan. It's known for its dryness, but now it's going to be well watered, is the point he's making here. The curse is lifted for every creature on the planet Earth except for the serpent, by the way. That's an interesting twist you may want to dig into. Egypt shall be a desolation. Okay, that's what we've been talking about. Now we have another thing. And Edom shall be a desolate wilderness for the violence against the children of Judah, because they have shed innocent blood in their land. And that's by way of contrast to the previous verse. So Egypt, let's talk about it first. From Jacob's descent into Goshen until today, Egypt has cast a long shadow over Israel's history. Pharaoh Necho killed King Josiah at Megiddo. He invaded Judah. He proved to be a false ally in Isaiah 36 and so on. Egypt will be downtrodden and subdued by the Antichrist, Daniel tells us. Yet, she will experience restoration. 5 major cities will speak the language of Canaan and be committed to the Lord of hosts. And Isaiah 19 deals with that. Egypt will be called my people. Get that. Egypt will be called my people. Assyria, the work of my hands. While Israel is declared the inheritance of the Lord. In Isaiah 19, he paints a very positive picture for both Egypt and Assyria, the 2 initial empires in the region. Assyria was first, Egypt later. Egypt will be a desolation, Edom shall be a desolate wilderness for the violence against the children of Judah because they have shed innocent blood in their land. Now I want to switch. You notice we've talked about Egypt. Now we're going to talk about Edom, and Edom deserves special study. I want to talk about the Olam Eba, the everlasting hatred. This is the Edom brings to fore here a bitterness, a hate that started in the womb. It's a continuing enigma to this very day. The everlasting hatred started in the womb and now continues to drive events throughout our entire world, even today. The judgment against this protagonist is mentioned more in the Old Testament books than against any other foreign nation. So we want to pay attention here. And yet, very few observers can point to who it represents today. I want to challenge you that, to understand who is Edom in contemporary terms, because it's such a central figure in the biblical text. Let's go back to Genesis 25. These are the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham begot Isaac. And Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah to wife, the daughter of Bethuel, the Syrian of Paddan Aram, and the sister to Laban the Syrian. And Isaac entreated the Lord for his wife because she was barren, and the Lord was entreated of him, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. And the children, more than one, 2 of them, the children struggled together within her. And she said, if it be so, why am I thus? She went to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord said unto her, 2 nations are in thy womb, and 2 manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels. The one people shall be stronger than the other people, and the elder shall serve the younger. And when her days were to be delivered, behold, there were twins in her womb. The first came out red all over like a hairy garment, and they called his name Esau. And after that came his brother out, and his hand took hold on Esau's heel. And his name was called Jacob, and Isaac was 80 years old when she bare them. And the boys grew, and Esau was a cunning hunter, a man of the field. Jacob was a plain man dwelling in tents. Isaac loved Esau because he did eat of his venison, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Now, when you get to the book of Romans, Paul comments on this in chapter 9. He says, for the children not being yet born, neither having done any good or evil, that the purpose of God, according to election, might stand, not of works, but of him that calleth. It was said unto her, the elder shall serve the younger. And as is written, Jacob have I loved, but Esau have I hated. Wow. Now let's go back here to Genesis 25. Another incident there. Jacob sawed pottage, and Esau came from the field and was faint. And Esau said to Jacob, feed me, I pray thee, with the same red pottage, for I am faint. Therefore was his name called Edom. And Jacob said, sell me this day thy birthright. And Esau said, behold, I am at a point to die. What profit shall this birthright do to me? Jacob said, swear to me this day. And he sware unto him. And he sold his birthright unto Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and pottage of lentils, and he did eat and drink, and rose up and went his way. Thus, but here's the point, Esau despised his birthright. That's the key point here. The covenanted covenant, Sarah over Hagar, Isaac over Ishmael, Jacob over Esau. That's all emphasized in the book of Genesis. Deserves very careful study. If you look at the descendants of Abraham, under Sarah, of course, he had Isaac. Under Hagar, he has Ishmael, and Ishmael will also have 12 sons. And then later, Keturah, and he has 6 sons there that become the people that we associate with Saudi Arabia and the Bedouins and so forth. The point is, under Isaac, we have 2 then, the twins, Esau and Jacob. And Esau, deliberately to offend his parents, marries, contrary to their wishes, a daughter of Ishmaelites. That's in Genesis 26. The descendants of Esau get commingled with the descendants of Ishmael and Zimran, both Hagar and Keturah. They all get commingled because they weren't called to stay separate. It's an important issue here. So Edom really means red. The name comes from Esau meaning red. It's the name of the land occupied by Esau's descendants, formerly the land of Seir. You hear Mount Seir is also an expression there. It stretched from Wadi Zared in the Gulf of Aqaba, extending to both sides of the Arabah, the Great Depression connecting the Dead Sea to the Red Sea. Now, Esau had already occupied Edom when Jacob returns from Haran, and there's a big reunion and all that, and they would seem to have buried the hatchet, but not really.
You've been listening to 6640, the ministry outreach of Koinonia House and Koinonia Institute. Today's Bible teacher was Chuck Missler, teaching through the book of Joel. Download the new K-House TV app to access an ever-growing collection of free resources. Visit the Apple or Android App Store, or search K-House TV on your Roku or Fire TV streaming device. Thank you for listening to 6640 and for your continued prayerful support of this ministry. Until next time, as we continue this series, may God bless you with the knowledge of His Son, Jesus Christ, as you study His Word.